All right, so if you clicked on this video, you're probably here because you're looking at getting into kayak fishing and you're on a budget. Times are hard, and I know that getting in a kayak and being able to fish is great, but sometimes the cost can be overwhelming. So I know your first inclination is probably just to go find a cheap kayak from wherever, throw all the gear you can imagine on it, and just start going fishing. But what if I told you guys that that is the completely wrong approach? And in this video, I'm going to discuss what I would do if I was starting kayak fishing now and I was on a budget. Because maybe you're a bank fisherman and you really want to expand your range and be able to fish in different places or out away from the bank. Maybe you're a boat fisherman and you just want to explore everything that kayak fishing has to offer. But no matter what your background is, I think you're going to find value in this video because I'm going to share with you a lot of the things that I've learned since kayak fishing since 2011, which is when I started kayak fishing, and I have done it for a long time. Because as people often say, you learn the most from your mistakes, and I have made a ton of them along the way. So I'm going to break this down into 4 key parts, so let's get started. So part 1 is going to be the kayak. You know, what we all think is the most important thing. But what I'm going to tell you is the kayak probably isn't the most important thing, but we'll get to that later. But when you're starting with a kayak, you know, a lot of people, your first thought is to go find a cheap kayak, whether that be on Marketplace, like on a used kayak, or just go to a big box store and buy something, wherever it may be. But I'm just going to tell you that that's probably not the right idea because you really need to analyze how you're going to use this kayak. So when I got my first kayak, I actually went to Bass Pro Shops and got an Ascend kayak, and it was a sit-in kayak. It wasn't the right kayak. I didn't do enough analysis of how I was going to use the kayak, what I wanted to do with it, and I ended up selling that kayak shortly later to get something better, which I ended up getting in a Jackson Cuda 12. But that kind of reinforces what I was saying, is you need to analyze what kind of waters are going to use this on. As you can see back here, this is a Jackson Kayak Kusa, and this is a great like river creek boat, but on lakes, it's probably not going to do as well. You might get blown around a little bit more. It's not going to attract as well. But for what I use it for, this is the perfect kayak because I like to fish on a kayak in streams and rivers. Next, you're really going to want to think about your budget. What is your budget for your kayak? How much money do you really have to spend? And when you're factoring all that together, you need to not just think about the kayak, but what is your overall budget? Especially if you're looking at buying new rods and reels, all the equipment to go along with the kayak, you kind of need to figure things out. And then also, the next thing you need to figure out whenever you're looking at a kayak is whether you want a pedal drive, traditional paddle kayak, or maybe a kayak that's going to do really well with an electric motor on the back. Because the thing is you want to be able to get in something that fits your budget, but you're also going to be able to grow into. You know, and this one is just a traditional paddle only kayak. It's a great kayak for what it's meant for. So finally, when you come to sourcing your kayak and where you're going to buy it from, you really got to think about whether you want to buy it new or used. And if you want a good deal on a kayak, a lot of really good deals can be found online, especially in this season because it's wintertime. It is freezing cold out in this garage, but it's a great time to find used kayaks. I actually picked this one up, and this one I got for a really good price for what I consider for it. It was, we'll just say, under $500. And you know, this is a great used kayak that somebody used recreationally. It's got a little wear to it, but nothing that's going to affect the usage of it, and it fits what I need. But when you get into more complicated kayaks, especially with a pedal drive that might have a warranty, you might want to buy one new. So if you all would like a video on my top recommendations if you're buying a new kayak on a budget, comment below and I'll make a video on my recommendations on that. So that's it for the kayak, which is part 1. Part 2 is going to be your gear. So the first and most obvious piece of equipment for a kayak is going to be your paddle. It's obviously separate from the kayak, but you want to get a good paddle, whether you're in a pedal drive kayak or a paddle driven kayak. I like these, and I will link these in the description below. But these are great paddles. I've had this one for a long time, and I actually used it across several different kayaks and enjoy this paddle here. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is a PFD, or personal flotation device. And I just consider that the most important piece of equipment on your kayak, because that's what's going to keep you safe. Because it's not a matter of if you will tip your kayak and fall in, it's a matter of when. And you want to wear that. You want to get one that's comfortable. I know some people like to wear a traditional PFD like the one that I have. I have the Chinook PFD, but I will link that down below. But then some people also prefer to wear one that's like one of the inflatable ones, especially in the summer months, because it gets so freaking hot outside and they're a little less, a little less bulky to keep all the heat in. Another thing that you might think about is getting a whistle in case you are out on a lake and need to alert somebody else to your position. You want to make sure that that's attached to your PFD or your person in case you fall out and you need help, that you have a whistle. It makes me think of like Titanic, Rose blowing the whistle. She should have put Jack on the door, but we won't get to that. And the final piece of equipment that I want to go over is a waterproof phone holder. A lot of us have these phones with us nowadays, and having a waterproof phone holder that you attach to your PFD is really nice to have. A lot of these kayaks have like a hatch on them where you can put your phone in, but that's a key mistake that I see a lot of people make, is especially on a river or a stream. If you put your phone in there and then you tip your kayak and your kayak gets away from you, you've lost your phone. You've lost your way to communicate. So I always recommend putting it in a waterproof phone holder, and either putting it in a pocket on your PFD or put it in your pocket, whatever, like tethered to you. Because I will tell you a story, and that is when I lived in Missouri and I was in that Ascend kayak. I actually flipped my kayak, and it was as I was going down a river, and there was a log in the river and what they call a strainer, and my kayak got pinned up against it and it had my phone in it. So when I said I've learned from my own mistakes, that's what I'm talking about, because my phone got caught in there, and then whenever I tried to open the waterproof hatch to pull it out, it got caught in the water. It was a whole big mess. So I've learned a lot of things not to do. Next, it's going to bring me to fishing equipment. Now, most of you guys are probably already fishing anyways, but when you're starting out kayak fishing, I would recommend a simple 3-rod system that I would recommend for you to use if you're going kayak fishing. So let's get into the first rod and reel combo for this 3-rod and reel system for kayak fishing. So the first rod is going to be a 7-foot medium heavy power fast action casting rod with a bait cast reel with a 6.8 to 1 reel ratio, or somewhere about in there, and 12 to 15 pound fluorocarbon line. This is going to be primarily used for jigs, soft plastics, spinner baits, and bladed jigs. Now, if you're limited on the amount of money that you can spend on rod and reels, you would want to spend your money on this rod, and the reason why is because the sensitivity on this rod is going to be more important whenever you're fishing those finesse presentations, and you're going to want to be able to have a little bit more of a sensitive rod for this rod and reel setup. Now, the second rod and reel combo is going to be another casting setup. It's going to be a 7-foot medium power moderate action with a bait cast reel, once again with a 6.8 to 1 gear ratio with 10 pound fluorocarbon line. Purpose of this rod is going to be primarily for crankbaits, and then you can also use it for jerk baits. Once again, not a perfect rod for everything, but it's going to get you by. This rod can be a little less as good a quality just because you're going to be using those moving baits with this rod. And finally, your final rod and reel combo for the 3-rod and reel combo system is going to be a 7-foot medium power fast action spinning rod with a spinning reel with a 5.2 to 1 gear ratio, 8 pound fluorocarbon line, or 20 pound braid. The purpose of this is going to be Ned rigs, drop shot, like smaller finesse presentations. And the reason why I usually say either fluorocarbon or 20-pound braid, I usually prefer 20-pound braid on this, and then I'll do a braid to fluorocarbon leader. It's just something that I prefer whenever I'm fishing this setup, just for me. And once again, this is going to be another finesse presentation type rod, so if you're trying to make sure you spend your money in the right place, this is going to be one of the rods that you're going to want to spend a little bit more money on, because you're going to be relying on the sensitivity of that rod once again. Just when you're starting out fishing on a kayak, you want to keep your gear to a minimum, because putting a bunch of stuff on this is going to change how it balances, and it's also going to be a lot more stuff to fumble with. You end up knocking a rod in the water, and when you knock a rod in your water, especially when you're thinking it's a, you know, $200, $300 rod and reel, your first instinct is to what? Reach and grab it, and that's going to be when you tip your kayak and end up falling out. And in months like these, it can be deadly. So you know, like when you're thinking about your fishing gear, you might want to think about getting, you know, a dry suit and stuff like that, just to keep you safe, especially if you're going to fish in the winter. But that will be a topic for another video. And as far as like your baits and stuff, I would recommend you keep it simple. Just take what you know that you're probably going to use, and as you learn throughout the seasons, you're going to learn the kind of baits that you prefer to use fishing from a kayak, because it might be different than what you would use fishing from a boat. So that wraps the fishing gear portion up, and then that's going to bring me to the final part of the 4 parts, and that is electronics. A lot of that depends on what you want to do, but if you're really on a budget, I just recommend that you start out without electronics and just see how you like kayak fishing. Go around, you know, you'll see a lot of these kayaks out there with, you know, an H-bar like on a Hobie with dual graphs and all that stuff up there. And I will just tell you guys that, like, a lot of times, like, it's funny because you'll see some of these big crazy kayaks online, because what happens is people get addicted to gearing out these kayaks, and they get all geared-o, they gear it out, and then they go fishing it and they don't like it. And you'll see a lot of those kayaks on Marketplace where somebody says, like, hey, I've only fished in this 7 times or something in a season, and it's probably because they probably hated, you know, getting the whole part of kayak fishing. So I just recommend like staying away from electronics, and if you are really on a budget, just like fish and enjoy the experience. And I know that I told you guys I was going to do 4 tips, but here is a bonus tip for you guys that stayed tuned all the way to the end of the video, and that is, if you're buying a kayak, and especially if you're buying something in the wintertime, it's a great time to find really good deals on used kayaks. But the one thing is that it's a really hard time to go out and demo kayaks, which is a key part of buying a kayak, because each kayak is going to act a little bit different and it might not fit your needs. So I really only recommend buying a kayak in the winter if you absolutely know what you're looking for, because it's really hard to demo kayaks in the wintertime. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that video, and if you're looking for more information, check out one of these other 2 videos here. And as always, guys, don't forget to get outside, do something awesome, and take somebody with you if you get a chance. And if you got any questions or comments, put them down below. I'll see you in the next one.